Okay, welcome back everyone. This is section number 5 of this orientation. This will be our last section before we review and we wrap up. Okay, so section number 5 begins on page 26, 25 and 26, okay? And anything that you see that has kind of a grayish colored banner means we are still behind tab number 5 in your manual. Okay, so here we're going to be talking about the nuts and the bolts of the Neighborhood Ambassador Program. Earlier we talked about the fact sheet or the 5 W's of what is an ambassador. We did that in section number 1. But here we're going to be talking about how to be an ambassador, and we're going to talk about how to distribute that Community Connection for Older Adults newsletter, both in an electronic format, a hard copy distribution, which may or may not be done in person, and then an in-person distribution. And then we're going to look at a review of the steps for a sample in-person interaction. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about those 2 simple administrative requirements that every ambassador has to do, called the monthly report and the confidentiality agreement. And then we're going to talk the benefits of being an ambassador, having one in the community. Okay, so let's get started with our electronic distribution. So first, you're going to send the newsletter via email through existing networks. So let's say, just for example, this is hypothetical. Let's say you have a faith-based organization in your community, and you're going to contact the pastor because he's the group leader, and maybe he has the email addresses of the members of his congregation. And so what you may want to do is go ahead and send them the newsletter via that particular method. And so when you first get started, you may want to draft a short email that's going to describe the newsletter and your role as an ambassador. So let's go ahead and look in your manual on page 26 for an example. Look towards the second half of that page, okay? It says sample electronic distribution. And that second bullet there gives you an example of a short email that describes the newsletter and your role as an ambassador. And this might be handy for you as you get started as an ambassador. And then once you get a little bit more experience under your belt, you may want to be able to customize that particular email for your community and the particular group that you're going to be presented to. And so the newsletter, or the sample email says, "Dear neighbor, I wanted to share the fall edition of the newsletter with you. The newsletter is brought to you by the Aging Services Council and Coming of Age and is meant to give you the latest news and information. And as an ambassador, I'm working to share this newsletter throughout our community. I've received training about the services, resources, and opportunities that are available to older adults. Please let me know if I can ever assist you in identifying the services or resources. Best regards," and your name. So again, that's just an idea or a draft to help get you started. Now let's stay on the electronic distribution for just a moment, okay? So what you're going to do possibly is cut and paste an article from that newsletter into another group's newsletter. So let's just use our faith-based organization again. So let's say there's an article in the Community Connection for Older Adults newsletter about safety for older adults. And you talk to the pastor and he thinks, gee, that's really an important topic for our congregation to know about. They may want to put that in their bulletin. Or what you can do is take an article in that newsletter and place it on some social networking site. And at the very minimum, you're going to provide that contact information, right? So that people know that you're a resource in the community. They know what the Neighborhood Ambassador Program is all about, and that you're going to provide information that's going to help them meet their basic day-to-day needs. Okay, so that's the electronic distribution. Let's talk about hard copy and or in-person distribution. So this is a different kind, okay? So let's talk about hard copy distribution first that is not done in person. So you could possibly place stacks in public places. You remember in section number 1, we talked about some possible distribution locations, and one of those was the library. So my suggestion is, if you have a library in your community, take a short stack of those newsletters and put them in the library. You want to maybe put your business card with there so people know how to contact you if they have questions. And I just put a short stack, and then after a couple of days, come back and check and see if they're gone. And if they're all gone, you may want to place a larger stack there. Another method is to attend community meetings. Now this is going to be done in person. You're going to introduce yourself, right? You're going to introduce yourself, let people know who you are and what you do. You can bring copies of the newsletter to different types of social clubs or groups. Maybe it's a bridge club or a book club or an exercise group. You can bring copies of the newsletter. This is an idea that we didn't talk about in section number 1 of a possible location, such as an apartment complex. And they frequently have resource rooms or community rooms. You might be able to even invite some older adults who are residents there and maybe have coffee and cookies or muffins and have that mini mobile library of the Community Connection for Older Adults newsletter with you. There's some other options. Okay, so next let's talk about a review of the steps for a sample in-person interaction. And this is just going to give you some ideas about how you might want to proceed as you get started. And so let's say that you're going to prepare for the meeting. So you've got preliminary steps to do. So you're going to sit down, you've got all these options of possible distribution locations, and you're going to look at your community and you're going to make some decisions about where you want to make your outreach efforts. Okay, so you're going to identify libraries and clinics and senior centers and so forth. Okay, so let's say you're going to make a presentation, you're going to ask for permission to be placed on that agenda. Okay, so you've got a place, you've got a date, you've got a time. You're going to be familiar with everything in your toolkit, right? That newsletter, the resources that we talked about in section number 4. You're going to have your laptop and clipboard, pen and paper. Remember, it was helpful for an ambassador to have basic computer skills. Some of those resources we just talked about in section number 4 are strictly online. And then you want to have a name badge ready. And why is that important? Well, you know, let's say you're making a presentation and you say, "Hi, I'm Kate Cadenhead. I am a neighborhood ambassador, and I'm available for questions at the end of this presentation." And so people may say, "Well, what was her name? I don't remember her name." And now you've got a name badge, so it's easy for them to recall. And it also just gives you kind of some more credibility. It just puts you in an official capacity. Okay, so what are you going to do at the meeting? You're going to introduce yourself. Why? Why is everybody going to introduce themselves? Right, you've got it, to let people know that you're a resource in the community, right? Give your affiliation. I'm with the Neighborhood Ambassador Program. Explain the purpose of the program. I'm here as an ambassador to provide relevant information for older adults that's going to help them meet their basic day-to-day needs. That's bullet number 1. You're going to distribute that newsletter, right? You may be able to email it to people. You may be able to create a distribution list. That's where your clipboard, pen and paper come in handy, especially if people want future publications. And you're going to provide that contact information, right? That's so important. That's why we keep mentioning that. Okay, what are you going to do after the meeting? Well, you're going to do your administrative requirements, right? And so the first one is filling out that monthly report, okay? Go ahead and pull out that monthly report sample that I told you was on the website. And then there's also a monthly report that's blank, okay? So what you're going to start doing on that monthly report is where and when the activity was carried out. So I presented at nonprofit XYZ on October 31st, okay? Number of people assisted. I made a presentation in front of 5 people. Literature distributed. I distributed the Community Connection for Older Adults newsletter and the Ride Guide. And then time spent in the volunteer activity. So I talked at a presentation for 7 minutes, and then I met one-on-one with an older adult and answered questions that they had and provided other feedback. Now, when you're out in the community, you may get questions that you really don't know the answer to, and so you may want to field those back to the Aging Services Council or Coming of Age, and then once you get some answers, you might want to go ahead and provide follow-up to an older adult. Or let's say you're out in the community as an ambassador and you have a really great story about someone that you met with that you'd like to share with the Aging Services Council or Coming of Age, or maybe you see some areas that haven't really been addressed by the Neighborhood Ambassador Program that we need to go in and really remedy and come up with a solution for. So let's go ahead and look at that monthly report, the one that's filled in. And this is what you're going to do every month. So you'll see at the top it says Mary Ambassador, right? And she filled this out in May of 2010. And then number 1 is where you're going to provide that log of everything that you did that month. So for example, the first one was on May 5th in 2010. And the activity was you attended a meeting and you distributed the newsletter and the Ride Guide. And you did that at the North Neighborhood Association Library. You helped 15 people and you spent 1 hour doing that, okay? So that's the number 1. Number 2, Electronic distribution, 80 copies of that newsletter, and you did hard copy distribution 15. You provided 3 people with individualized information. Other types of materials distributed were that ride guide, and you distributed 5 of those. Did you come across any questions you weren't able to answer? And Mary Ambassador said no. And then she said other services or resources. What did people ask her about? And she said caregiver resources and transportation. And then she had some suggestions for aging-related topics that she'd like to see covered in future newsletters, and that was mainly around Medicare enrollment and options. And then she doesn't have any other comments or suggestions about the Neighborhood Ambassador program. Now that blank one is just meant to help you be able to run off copies every month that you fill one out. Okay, so that's the monthly report. That's the first administrative requirement. The second one is that confidentiality agreement. Okay, that confidentiality agreement is where you're not going to identify anyone that you've met with. Okay, so after you fill out that Neighborhood Ambassador application, you're going to go ahead and sign and date it, and then you're going to forward it to Deborah Price. That's the Community Engagement Coordinator, and she's going to go ahead and sign and date it. Okay, and then all inquiries are confidential, so you're not going to reveal any information about who you meet with to family or friends or neighbors. And you're going to limit that assistance to only providing contact information. So what I like to think of is sort of neighborhood ambassadors in the middle. On the left-hand side is the senior relevant information, and on the right-hand side is your older adult. And so really you're acting as a conduit, or you're just facilitating the transfer of that information, those resources and referrals. So you're completely independent and you're neutral. And under no circumstance should you provide counseling or opinions or judgments. You're not going to say, well, this resource is better than that resource, or I advise you to do that, or you might not want to do that. You really want to be careful about providing any types of opinions or judgments. Now, let's stay on the confidentiality agreement for a second. You're only going to meet in local public settings, right? We identified those in section number 1. No in no one's home or anyone else's home. Okay, it has to be local public settings. And if as an ambassador that you suspect that someone is the victim of abuse and neglect or exploitation, you want to make sure that you contact Adult Protective Services, or if you become aware that an older adult is at risk of harming him or herself, you want to make sure that you dial that crisis line, which is 911. And that document that I asked you to download, called that confidentiality agreement, really just outlines everything that we just talked about. You're going to go ahead and sign that, and then Deborah Price, our Community Engagement Coordinator, will go ahead and sign that as well. Now that is something that you only have to do one time. Okay, so what are the benefits? We're about to wrap up. What are the benefits of having an ambassador in the community? And first, you've just got a more informed community, right? Communities that have ambassadors are going to know where to turn for this information about aging services, resources, and tools that are going to help educate older adults. You're going to have an in-community expert, right? Not only yourself, but you're going to be educating other older adults. So let's say a popular topic in your community is Alzheimer's, and so you share information with 1 or 2 older adults, and then their friends say, well, I'm interested in Alzheimer's, and then those particular people share with them. So it's almost like a ripple effect. You've got a lot more influence than just maybe your direct interaction with people. And then you're inspiring and improving and connecting, right? So you're going to inspire older adults to really take advantage of the resources that you have. You're going to inspire them, you're going to improve them to help them live a better quality of life. You're going to inspire and improve yourself. You're probably going to improve your self-esteem. You're going to feel like you're of service to the community, and you're going to really make connections between information and older adults. It's really going to help them improve the quality of their lives. So that about wraps up our orientation. Let's review briefly what we just talked about. We talked about the partnership between the Aging Services Council and Coming of Age. We've explained the purpose, which is to help older adults and their caregivers find reliable and accurate information about aging issues. We talked about the functions and responsibilities of ambassadors. We did that in section number 1 and 5. We looked at the core issues in section number 3, safety, transportation, basic needs. Section number 4, we looked at some resources and tools. And then last, we covered the benefits of being an ambassador, and that was having an informed community, an in-community expert, and then inspiring, improving, and connecting. So that's our review and wrap. We have our website address here and our phone number. And again, that last sheet that I asked you to print out had my information. I'm Kate Cadenhead, and it also had Deborah Price's information. So that wraps up our Neighborhood Ambassador Orientation Training. I hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.